Paul Lambert, you're the visual effects supervisor for Dune Part 2, following your work on Part 1. And after doing so much world building in the first film, what were the new challenges that presented themselves in Part 2?
Basically, Dune 2 was bigger, way more action sequences, more intense. Like on the first film, we saw a little bit of the sandworms. Like they were in the dark and that kind of thing. And this one, like they were in the bright day. We had a lot more set pieces out in the desert. Like on the first one, we spent a week in the UAE, but on this one, we spent a month out there, and we had to build roads and concrete slabs to bring cranes on and bring huge pieces of equipment. It was much bigger. And you'd think that, going on for like a continuation of a story, that like we would be able to turn on all the old assets, all the old ornithopters and stuff. But I think there's only one shot where like we see the original ornithopter, which we saw on June 1. Everything else changed. All the ships were new, the sets were new, the people people were new. So yeah, it was a much bigger challenge.
Now, both films are, of course, based on Frank Herbert's novel. Did anything from the book give you guidance in terms of visualizing the worlds and the technology, or are you basically just going from the script and your discussions with Denis and the other
Yeah,
departments?
I made a conscious decision on June 1 that like I wouldn't reread the book. Like it was I read the book as a teenager, so like years ago, and like I made a conscious decision before June 1 that like I wouldn't reread the book, and but like I would just try to use Denis' script and like his ideas for the film, and that would be the actual basis, which is exactly what I did for uh, for June 2 as well. But also, Denis has such a very clear vision as to what the film should be, and very much like the first one, like Patrice, the production designer, he basically worked with Denis and created basically a book of concept imagery, which like defined the entire movie. And basically, we built those sets. I made the visual effects to look like those images. So like we always had a guide, which like is rare because usually you use a concept to as like a stepping stone for like other, to like continue different ideas. But on this, Denis was very specific. Look, this is this is this is how I dreamt about the movie, and this is how I'm expecting the actual movie to be. So that's basically what we did. We followed this Bible to like try to bring it to life.
Now you've worked with Denis Villeneuve multiple times now. How would you describe him in general as an artist and a collaborator?
He's a visionary. Like one of my first experiences with the Denis was on the set of Blade Runner, which was like so like huge for me that like there'd be days where like I'd be I'd be watching the video feed for like specifics for like visual effects, and like he'd come wandering around because he's a pacer as well. Like like he'll like pace around the set and like stop and talk to people, and like basically we'd be looking at the frame, and then like he'd be explaining to me all the negative space which he sees, and you think, oh my goodness, this man like sees things which like like that like you have to look twice to actually find. He's like it's rare to see Denis in a bad mood. Like, he's good people, and like he works really well with everybody, and also he's a great collaborator. Even though he has a vision, he will listen to like other ideas and like hone everything in. He's an absolute pleasure to work with. Like he shoots with one camera, you know what I mean, which I personally love. That so like like when you have multiple cameras, it's so difficult to like try to get your visual effects to be correct for all those cameras. So like him using one camera, we gets on so well with all the heads of departments, and like yeah, no, he's good people. He's a real gentleman, and like it's rare that like you see him in a bad mood or anything. He has a happy set basically.
Now, one of the early standout scenes in the film is Paul and the Fremen attacking the harvester, the Harkonnen spice harvester. Uh, how did that scene come together? How did you envision that hulking kind of machine?
Yeah, like we did a lot of setup for those scenes out in the desert. Basically, when we're out in the desert, the rule is that like we always want to use the actual sunlight. We don't want to be faking something inside of a studio, and that has certain implications in that like you're always chasing the sun. So like you want to be on a particular set on a particular time of day, looking in a particular way. Like Greg like always Greg the DOP always wanted to shoot backlit for the for the for the dunes, of which means that you have to be somewhere specific and like get the shot and then you move on to a different set. And the like Spice Crawler was was a tricky one to do because like one of the things which like I discussed with Denis is that like in doing visual effects, you don't really want to be changing the lighting or the shadow work on a human being because it's so difficult to do that like you always pick up something that is wrong. Like the audience may not know exactly what it is, but something doesn't sit right. And like once you start playing with like trying to add shadows and that kind of thing on a human performer or on like one of the actors, it's very tricky to actually pull off, especially if you're going from like high intensity sun to shade. So in that scene, Denis wanted to play the characters in and out of the shadows of the actual legs. So Gert, our special effects supervisor, actually built huge actual practical legs attached to industrial tractors, which like you can move up and down and move around. I had an iPad where like we had an interactive view of what this massive ship would uh, would 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 be in the frame, but like we were also able to follow where the sun was to see where the shadow was, which meant that okay, we want to stay clear of this particular area because it's going to be in shadow, and but then like we don't have a shadow maker for that particular thing. So it was very organized in that way to like try to get the most believable basis for me to then augment the play. It was always it was always carefully thought through as to time of day, how to do this, which direction, so that basically when I went into post, then like me putting in the rest of the structure actually fit quite well. Like obviously we had to extend shadows and that kind of thing, but the main core of like the action was there. I just had to extend it out. I make it sound pretty straightforward. It did take months to actually do, but having the best basis is why I'm there on set. It's to work with all the HODs, work with Denis to like try to figure out how we're going to do this, and also working with Greg is like fantastic because like he's very technically savvy and like basically him and his assistants worked out how to where where the sun would be relative to all the dunes and stuff. So like basically we could jump from one set to another to another to another. And that obviously helped me because then I have plates which I don't have to change too much and I just add the CG and it just works, you know?
Now you mentioned the sandworms. Of course, you've got that credible set piece where Paul's riding the sandworm for the first time. What kind of work went into that sequence?
Yeah, and it was a lot of talking about that particular sequence. In fact, it was one of the first Zoom calls. Like we hadn't even left for Budapest, but like we had a we had a HOD Zoom call where basically Denis pitched this idea of like how a Fremen gets on a worm. Like basically he calls it, the worm collapses, and basically he falls onto the worm. Absolutely stunning idea, but we're all kind of like, how the heck are we going to do this? Knowing that, like, we all want to try to get a practical approach to this, so that there were many factors to the worm. Like, for example, when Paul is running and like he actually collapses onto the dune. We actually out in the UAE, we built a small peak of a dune, and Gert put some steel tubes inside of the dune so that when a stunty would run, it was on a wire, and the camera behind him, when he would run, we would then pull the tubes, and like he would fall down. So then I would then make it as if it was way higher. But obviously, doing that, you can only do that one time a day, especially when you're trying to chase the light. So, like, it was early morning and we did it for 4 days. So, basically, we had four attempts. And by the fourth, we actually got it. And that was just the end, the like intro into that particular scene. Like, when he's actually on the worm and he's riding, that was actually shot in Budapest. And what we did is the art department built a section of the worm, and then Gert had a gimbal where, like, basically it could tilt and rotate to any any angle, and then like we surrounded that that contraption with this huge cylinder, which was all sand colored. The idea being that was like we only ever shot on a sunny day, so that the sun would hit this surround and bounce onto either Paul or Charney or to one of the stomp players, so that you then felt the actual light of the desert hitting them, then blast them with sand, and so like we had this great interactive kind of feel to the whole piece, and then we shot aerial photography from a helicopter, which flew very close to the ground, and used those along with CG additions to the plates of obviously to get that sense of like the like really fast travel. It's trying to be as visceral as possible. And we had set up the worm to be traveling at, I think, 300 kilometers an hour. So yeah, it was really hauling. It was really dangerous, and like the idea was to like try to feel as much of that peril as possible. So having the worm tilt and Paul coming down to the side, holding on. But yeah, and that took months to shoot. And testament to the praise to the production team, because like you're not usually allowed to like spend so long on a particular scene, but we had rules where like you had to shoot on a sunny day. So like when it wasn't sunny, that team called the worm unit would then go off and shoot Aaliyah, which was a prosthetic in basically a fish tank, which we shot practically and added CGIs to. So when it wasn't sunny, they would go off and do that, and then when it was sunny, they would come back. So we were given a lot of time to actually perfect that, and sometimes it took one shot. It was put 1 day or 2 days just to get the right kind of performance, because Denis was very worried that sequence could look a little bit comical. You know what I mean? Like, obviously somebody in this huge worm can could so easily not have gone as well as it did. But no, it was fun. It was fun.
Now you have big visual effects like these huge sequences like those. Were there some subtler effects that that stand out to you that you were especially proud of that you were able to achieve amid all that?
Yeah, honestly, like it was we had such a range of different techniques and effects. Like, for example, the baby worm, like when you see that um in the scene, and like it's traveling underneath the sand, that there is all special effects. Like, so basically they built a they built a rig where like basically a ball and chain, and pull that along a track covered in sand, so that like you actually get to see the sand move. Obviously I did a little bit of cleanup here and there, but by and large that's a special effect. When the baby worm is um outside of the sand and it's wrapping itself around the character, that's actually that's being puppeteered by like three puppeteers. So in the frame, when you see the original footage, you actually see three puppeteers with sticks actually trying to move the worm. So obviously we clean out all the puppeteers, but then also we also added some very subtle kind of accordion kind of movement to the scales, just to give it a little bit of life. And then like when she brought it into the water and put it under the water, again, that's the puppet. We had the puppeteers in the water, and they were splashing around. Clean those up, and then like whenever the worm popped out above the surface, like we would just add a little bit of CG. So like even though like you knew that like this was it wasn't so subtle, but like the kind of work which we did was very subtle on like a very practical kind of approach. Even I touched upon the baby Aaliyah, in the womb. That was shot as a prosthetic inside inside a fish tank with like various gels and things, and like that took weeks and weeks and weeks of shooting as well, and it was such beautiful imagery. The only thing we had to do was just replace the eyes and add CGI, just to add the odd little blink every now and then, just to add that bit of realism. So yeah, there were lots of little things sprinkled throughout, as well as the huge obvious visual effects.
Now you've won three Oscars for your visual effects work. You've actually won on all of your nominations so far. Does that feel like a vote of confidence carrying you into each new project?
Like I try not to, I try not to think of it. I try not to think about that too much. I've been on a very good run, and I've worked with some amazing directors. But like I basically love what I do. So everything is a challenge. Everything. I don't look back and say, oh, I've got to make it better. I just don't think like that. It's like everything is a challenge. How can we how can I work with everybody around me to get the best possible thing? It's all down to a collaboration. Because if I don't get something good from set from all these wonderful people who are the best in the world, then I'm gonna have a lot of trouble in post, like trying to figure something out. And working with Denis, who has such a clarity of vision, and he has a really good eye, that working with him is a joy. It's like I know my what my strengths and weaknesses are, and working with Denis, I just think uh, is a good combination. Like, we have a shorthand now. Like if he comes to me with an idea and I hesitate a little bit, he'll change it. So just so that because the one thing for Denis is that you don't ever want to be in one of his stories and like something comes up and it takes you out of that story. It's all about world building. It's all about the immersion in like the actual narrative. And I like working that way. I like to like try to do everything so that you don't know that I've actually done something to it. It's kind of strange thing to say, but you know, to actually show off my work, you have to try to find it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on all the work you did on both films. It's quite an achievement. And thank you so much for talking with me about it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much.